This is section 122, the rich young ruler continued. And we are going into question 682 in a moment. We want to just recap just slightly that to point out that this young ruler did have, even if it was not an explicit recognition of Christ, it was one that he had sort of backed himself into a corner about by calling him good master, that this was a kind of a term that was understood in Jewish culture, referring to God. And so it was somewhat reserved to be able to do that. And so even though he didn't say, you are the Messiah that we've been waiting for, thou art the Christ, like Peter did, nonetheless, he was dancing all around it. So it could be said that he did have knowledge and understanding. And so there are some very nice things that come out of this because of that. And so we're looking at question 682 now. And the question is, how did the young ruler respond to Jesus? And we're going to take the response based on Matthew 19, verses 16 and 18. Verses 16 says, "And behold, one came and said unto him, Good master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life?" In verse number 18, he saith unto him, which? Jesus said, Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. So the answer that we got is, how did the young ruler respond to Jesus? It is A. He tried to find out which commandment would get him into heaven. Okay, so when we look at B, where he declared that Jesus was the Christ who could make him righteous by faith, well, that would have been the right thing to do. But as I said, he had really danced all around this. Making a note here. And this could maybe be taken as a sign of his sense of guilt over the matter. Okay, when we look at C, he left him because he was satisfied that he was doing all the commandments. Okay, this reminds me of a lot of people who, when you talk to them about if they were sure they're going to go to heaven, regularly, most of the time, you will hear, well, I'm doing the best that I can. I think I'm keeping the law pretty much. And of course, that's because people are staying fairly ignorant of the law, and so they don't really think, because if you really consider the law, you would feel guilty. The fact that the young man didn't leave but sought clarification indicates that he had some doubt about himself. And it suggests that he knew that the law did not have the power to save. If he thought that the law could save, he'd have some kind of greater assurance, but he didn't really even have that assurance. Of course, if he had left thinking that he was actually doing all the commandments, this would indicate that he's not very smart. Okay, it would mean that he was ignoring so many things. So, the answer, of course, is A. The young ruler possibly sensed that something was missing, and he wanted to make sure that he had that base covered too. So this could also be an indication that he knew that Jesus was from God, at the very least, because someone who was so excellent was a good one to compare yourself to. So he was recognizing the goodness of God. Yes, Brother Joe.
I'm not sure why, but this kind of reminds me of the Apostle Paul when he's on Mars Hill and he sees all the devotions.
Yeah.
And then he sees one to the unknown God, because I guess similarly to the young ruler, they realized something was missing.
Yeah. Just in case. Right. Just in case. Okay. Question 683. Jesus had already challenged the young ruler about his relationship to God. Which of the commandments dealing with our relation to man did Jesus leave out in his next challenge? It's based on Exodus 20:17. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. So which one did he leave out? B, not to covet, right. Okay. Now, if you look at A, not judging is a popular notion that people assume is noble and good. So if you ask people today, they might say, oh, well, I don't judge. No, they don't say that. I mean, that doesn't occur to them. But that's what seems to be the main thing that most people are worried about. They tell you not to judge. They judge you about your judging. They judge you to be judgmental. Yeah. Okay, when you look at C, not to talk about religion or politics. Okay, so when you get to talking about your relationship to others, to man, well, not talking about religion or politics is another popular notion that people have of what is not acceptable. People are often more consumed about good manners in a polite and politically correct society, so that their social rules trump God's rule. So the answer is B. The young man sort of had the first commandment down. He was willing to worship God. And the first commandment is the contrary of the last commandment, where self is put first. You could almost suggest that when you look at the Ten Commandments, you have a scope or a range of sin going from the most, dealing with the most important thing of being other-centered as far as God is concerned and being self-centered at the last. So you have God-centered, it's covered by the first commandment. Being self-centered is covered in the last. And so you have like a degradation in between the two. Brother Joe, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in an aside that I think the reason why so many people are poorly equipped to talk about politics is because they've been told since they were a young age not to talk about it. And then when there comes a time for that kind of discourse, because there is always going to come a time for that.
Yeah.
They just don't know what to do. They just, they've been told all their lives, and they've decided not to talk about it, and they don't know how to disagree civilly.
Yeah, but I think there's also an element of it being a cop-out.
No, I would agree with that as well, but I'm just saying that even when there comes a time when people might be ready to talk about it, finally, they just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, by recognizing that Jesus was God, sort of, and naming all the commandments, Jesus was holding out for the final test and focusing on the true nature of the young man. And it would end up being like a laser focused on his heart. It's like he left everything out there. He included everything except the one so that it would stand out by itself. Question 684, what made the young ruler so accountable for how he responded to the demands of the law? It's going to be based on Luke 18:21. He said, all these have I kept from my youth up. Okay, so the answer is, a ruler was supposed to have had mastery in his understanding of the law. So that's what made him so accountable. He should have been, and he did demonstrate that he had that sense of accountability by saying, well, I've kept all these commandments. So for A, he had violated so many of the commandments so regularly. Well, the young ruler claimed the opposite of that. He suggested that he was very familiar with the law because he was a practitioner of the law. For B, he was ignorant of the law. Well, it's widely said that ignorance of the law is no excuse, but this doesn't matter anyway because God has revealed his power and righteousness to all, according to Romans chapter 1. And so C, as a ruler, he should have been very familiar with it. Question 685. What indicated that the young ruler was covetous? And this is based on Matthew 19:22. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. So the answer is?
Hey.
Okay, yeah, he could not bear the thought of parting with any of his great riches in order to follow Christ. Now, this aspect of covetousness is very far-reaching. Mr. Alex, when this is probably, when it comes to the Ten Commandments, this is the one that's kind of insidious. It sort of sneaks up on a person. Like, one of the commandments, thou shalt not kill. Are you planning to kill anybody? Good, okay, that's very good to know, okay? Or how about steal from anybody? You're not going to steal from anybody, okay? Any plans on committing adultery? No, okay. Do you have any plans on worshiping any false idols? However, do you have any plans of being covetous? And I'm going to catch you now. Do you have any plans of being covetous? Well, and yet that's the problem. Okay, you might not plan on being covetous, and this is not to put you on the spot, because I can say this to everyone in the room including myself, okay, is that we end up being covetous and we don't even realize it half the time. For instance, covetous is when you want something that rightly doesn't rightly belong to you, and you're envious of somebody else that has it. Let's say it's Sunday morning and the alarm clock goes off. What time do you have your alarm clock set for? Around 6? Okay. Now at 6 o'clock the alarm clock goes off. And here's where covetousness kicks in. 6 o'clock the alarm clock goes off, and you want to take something away from God. Now, how would that work? What would that look like? You want something that doesn't belong to you, that it belongs to God, and you want it. Do you know what that is? Take a guess what that might be. Has something to do with time.
Sleep.
Here you go. Did you hear that? Okay. So what happens is you want God's time. What time is God's time? What's the time that belongs to God? I'm sorry, what? Oh, well, specifically, we're talking Sunday morning after the alarm clock has gone off at 6 o'clock. There's a time that we can say, yeah, all time belongs to God, but there's a specific time to plan. Huh? Church time. The hours of 9:30 to, the hours of 10 o'clock to at least 12 o'clock, depending on how long I get preaching, that belongs to God. Now, what if you take that time for yourself instead? That would be being covetous, right? Do you see how it works? We don't even think about that. We just think, oh, I'm a little tired. I just want to sleep a little bit more. No, what we've done is we have coveted something that belongs to God. If you see somebody, let's say you have a friend. Alex, I'll keep picking on you for a little while, okay? Let's say you got a friend, and your friend is telling a joke that he shouldn't be telling, okay? And your friend is probably on his way to hell, let's say. Okay, we're going to pick, do you have, see if you can think of a friend who's not a Christian. Got somebody in mind? Okay, so you got somebody in mind. Okay, so that person, you owe him something. It's according to Romans chapter 1. Do you know what you owe to that person that you're keeping back from him possibly? Ah, there you go. You got that one right. He's got it. Okay, I thought that was going to be a little bit harder to figure out. Right, we owe people the gospel. And so when we hold back, we are coveting that because we're more concerned about how we are looking. Well, so you eventually get around to inviting him, encouraging him to get saved. So you see, covetousness can occur all over the place. When people are out there saying it's not fair, everybody should get the same pay, they're coveting what other people have. When they say we need to tax the rich more, they're coveting what the rich have because they would like those benefits that come from that to go to them instead. So that's covetousness. Covetousness is all over the place. It's basically based on thinking of self first. So this young man, he couldn't bear the thought of parting with any of his great riches in order to follow Christ. When you look at B, he was only willing to give up any riches if he could use it as a tax deduction. Okay. Well, it's been pointed out that believers will give the same amount. Believers, true believers will give the same amount whether they lose a tax break or not. A genuine believer will do that. Other people, however, will decrease their giving in the assumption that they are helping others through their taxes. And if giving to the church means only giving to charity, then they should be excused, because they only think of giving to church as giving to charity. They don't think of paying the church bills. Okay, so they look at taxes. Well, part of my taxes are going to go to increase people's welfare, so I guess I'm giving that way. And that is an actual mentality that has been discovered. Okay, they don't take into account that giving to church is giving to the Lord's work of soul winning and bringing people to God, which the state is not going to do. So giving more taxes to the state is not going to replace truly what the church is all about. So if giving only is good for a tax break, then people are more interested in ways to keep more of their money. They're not really concerned about the work of the Lord. Yes, Brother Joe.
That would also violate Jesus' command to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and to render unto God that which is God's.
Yeah. Okay. Look at C. He was only willing to give up any riches if he could direct how they were to be used. Now, some people actually only will give in church if they're able to tell how the money should be used. Now, there are limited ways in which money can be directed in general, but the more somebody wants to control them, the more likely they do not see the money. They do not see the money as given to the Lord, but as something that still belongs to them. Now, let me clarify, because there are certain things that we can direct funds to. Like, for instance, we have our tithes, right? And we give our tithes. And then people will give above and beyond tithes as special offerings. It might be to missions, it might be to deacons, it might be to something else. And so we've set up specifically so people can give extra. What I'm talking about is sometimes you'll have somebody who's kind of covetous in his nature. He doesn't want to really let go of the funds. And so what they'll do is they'll say, well, I'll give, but I want it to go to this cause over here. That has actually been used by some people to try to kill a program that they don't agree with. They say, well, I'll give, but I want to make sure that my money's not going over to that thing that I didn't vote for. And so what they really want to do is they want to have the control. I've known this to be used to be able to have people say, well, I want to do this, but I want to try to get the pastor out because I don't like him. So they try to say, well, as long as it doesn't go to this need or that need, they want to be able to say it. When you give to the general fund, when you give the tithes, there's no directing that. Okay, if we have not deliberately set up a fund, you can't make sure it goes to something. Now, you can say I'm giving this because of such and such, and then the Treasury can use that to predict, well, how much we need to be able to use to take care of different matters. But that, and the IRS doesn't even allow you to do it. If you have control over the general offering, the IRS looks at that as a commercial operation then, instead of a thing about donations. So when people, when they want to be directing things, they really want the control, and this is a form of covetousness. So you look at A. This young man was confronted with the idea of total surrender, and that's what he was not able to do. His wealth and substance was just too important to him rather than wealth in heaven. So these all actually indicate a kind of covetousness. It's just the way the young ruler manifested covetousness was to not be willing to give up anything at all. Okay, we should be aware that there are actually many ways to be covetous. Okay, question 686. Why would it be hard for a rich man to get saved? It's based on Mark 10:23. And Jesus looked round about and saith unto his disciples, how hardly shall they have riches enter into the kingdom of God? So the answer is A, because of their trust in their wealth. When you look at B, because having too much money is a sin, well, B is wrong for two reasons. First, it suggests that there's such a thing as too much money. Okay? One cannot predict how much money is going to be needed for future problems. So you can't say that there's too much. Should you be limited to having $1 million? Alex, should we give you $1 million? Yeah, that's a good idea. Why stop at $1 million, though, Alex? Okay, well, can you anticipate what you're going to need in the future? No. Okay, you don't know if you're going to have an accident, you're going to have your legs cut out from under you or not. So how can you say what's too much? Now, there might be such a thing as money lying around that will probably never be used, but that's only a question of an inefficient use of money. As Christians, we need to have spiritual wisdom on the use of money. The second problem is that money itself is a sin. No. God speaks of the wise use of money, especially in the book of Proverbs, but does not condemn wealth by itself. When it comes to money, money is not a sin, but what does the Bible say is a sin about money? The love of money, which is covetousness, by the way. Okay, C, because the wealthy only get rich by corrupt methods, and so that's why having money is bad? Well, it's true that the wealthy sometimes get rich by corrupt methods. That's true. But that's only one possibility. You will always have disparities between people. But there are a number of reasons why that would be true. So Thomas Sowell writes about this in a book called Discrimination and Disparities. He says, what seems a more tenable conclusion is that the world has never been a level playing field. The idea that it would be a level playing field if it were not for either genes or discrimination is a preconception in defiance of both logic and facts. Nothing is easier to find than sins among human beings, but to automatically make those sins the sole or even primary cause of different outcomes among different peoples is to ignore many other reasons for these disparities. It's not just because of corruption, not just because of sins. He says geographic differences are one among many other factors that make for a skewed distribution of outcomes. And I thought this was interesting. Coastal peoples have long tended to be more prosperous and more advanced than people of the same race living farther inland, while people living in river valleys have likewise tended to be more prosperous and more advanced than people living up in the mountains. So that can account for the differences, not just because somebody was in sin and stealing from others. He says, while Karl Marx's vast 3-volume economic treatise was a far greater intellectual achievement, exploitation was at no point in its 2,500 pages treated as a testable hypothesis. It was just an assumption. What was instead the foundation on which an elaborate intellectual superstructure was built, that proved to be a foundation of quicksand. Getting rid of capitalist exploiters in communist countries did not raise the living standards of workers, even to levels common in many capitalist countries where workers were presumably still being exploited. Okay, so just saying, okay, well, it's got to be sin, no, okay? There's like many reasons, and he pointed out the coastal reasons, and the whole idea of exploitation was not something he even treated as something that was testable. Karl Marx inherited money? Oh, a person can inherit money, yes. Yeah. Okay. So D, because enjoying the fruits of your labor is sinful when others do not have much? Well, the poor will always be here for numerous reasons. When asked about this, I've had to explain that there are some who become poor as a result of bad life skills and the reinforcement of those bad life skills. I was asked recently, oh, well, you've got Thanksgiving coming up and you're going to be busy with things like food drives. And I had to say, well, number one, if I had to answer honestly, which I did, I said, well, no. I said, what we have the Thanksgiving breakfast. And I said, but I thought to myself, I don't want this person to have a wrong understanding. And I said, it's not as simple as you'd like it to, that a lot of people think it might be. I said, there are a number of reasons why people are in that position. We've had a food pantry. Finally, we had to just distribute it to church members because nobody was around who would take it. And those who wanted to come in, they wanted money. They didn't want to have the food. I said, now there are some people who genuinely might need something like that, but I said, what happens is typically somebody who's in need won't ask. They've got too much dignity. And others that have made bad life choices, which put them in that position to begin with, continue to make bad life choices. I explained, I've had work. I've created jobs a couple of times for people, and yet they preferred to go back to panhandling. I talked about the pastor down the street, Pastor Robinson, who explained he had been on like a city council that dealt with such things, and he just got frustrated with it because he said the people, they don't really want to get out of that position. And so he, if anything, is more into the social stuff, and he couldn't take it. Then there's also those who are the victims of government systems that make it hard to leave the system. Somebody just pointed out that it's not just the case that people seeking employment is down right now because of the government money that was given, but what happened at the same time was that when people were getting the unemployment checks, the extra unemployment money, they were also signing up for other government programs. And so it's not just a case of not getting the money, but now if they go to work, then they lose the benefits. And many times, the benefits taken away outstrip the benefits you can get from working. And so it tends to suck somebody in. And so some people just end up, not for any bad reasons, but it takes a lot of time and effort to be able to make their way through the maze of government paperwork and programs, that becomes their job practically. Then there are those who are just stuck by their physical circumstances. There are yet others who are not wealthy, but they're not exactly poor either because they value other things like time and relationship more than hyperachievement. So you see, there's all kinds of reasons why the poor are always going to be with you. It's not just a question of sin. So as Christians, we should do good to the poor out of the love of God. Mark 14:7 says, "For you have the poor with you always, and whensoever you will, you may do them good, but me you have not always." So we need to put God first, and then realize the poor will be there. For many reasons, you do what you can. Deuteronomy 15:11 says, "For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, Thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, and to thy needy in thy land." But this does not mean that we should feel guilty for what we have. In Ecclesiastes 3, verses 12 and 13, Solomon writes, "I know that there is no good in them but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God." Okay, so that brings us back to A. The problem with wealth is the idea of trusting in it. Now, you can demonstrate this by the assumption that wealth will take care of you when you should be depending on God instead. And I see this a lot with this attitude of covetousness when we see, after talking to numerous young men going into ministry, and you invite them to the Northeast, And the first thing they want to point out, and we've heard this explicitly, well, it costs more to be there. The cost is very prohibitive. They don't stop to think about the cost that people are going to make by spending in hell for eternity. Okay, the cost of living here is nothing compared to the cost of eternity in hell. But they're sensitive to it. They shouldn't be thinking of that. The question should be, well, it's going to be rough, but I'm going to be depending on God to take me there. And I'll say this is something that Nancy and I had as we were coming down to Bayonne here. It was like, well, we're going to go, and this is what God's called us to, and we're going to just have to depend on God. And it was rough, and God did take care of things, too. I heard a voice at home there. Go ahead and speak up there again.
Yes, I was just going to say, Pastor, if the Lord leads somebody here, He's going to provide. It doesn't matter how high the cost of living is. God provides over and above.
Yes, yes. And we have, I'm telling you, we have had some very rough times. But you just keep going on. And this is borne out by the fact that I mean, if you ask any one of the people that we've talked to, they'll swear that it's not because of the finances. And yet, why is it that in the aggregate, when you look at the sum total of all that's going on here, why is it that young men do not ever feel the call to come to the Northeast? For some reason, God calls them everywhere else. God's not calling them here, or is it they're not answering the call is the question. So individually, you might say, well, this one has a rationale that sounds plausible, and that one does. But in general, it's not going to happen continually. On the average, it's going to have to pan out. Yes, Miss Nancy.
We see that God's hand can be evident working in many different ways. If somebody's sick, God could use just the right doctor, just the right medication, just the right surgery, or God could just heal the person while they're sleeping. He can choose whatever way that He wants to work. When we first came and we didn't have anything and costs were prohibitive, God, by one means or miracle after another, He sustained us. Sometimes money would show up in the mailbox. Sometimes food would show up on the doorstep. Sometimes opportunities to work would open up. And then more and more jobs or more opportunities, or as the church grew, the church could provide. All of those were God's ways of providing. And when He does things that are really amazing, like if money just shows up in an envelope and it happens to be just what you needed, we took that as confirmation that we answered the call and we were doing exactly what God wanted. And even though sometimes we weren't sure how provision was going to come, it got to be exciting to watch the ways that God worked. However, when He provides somebody a regular source of income, whether it's by a job or a pension or whatever, that's still God's provision and still His hand on your life saying, yes, I'm blessing you. So we really need more younger people to come forward and say, who's going to reach those in the Northeast?
Yeah.
Where is their light and salt for them? And just as God could call somebody to an impoverished land of heathen who are resistant, that can be an intimidating situation. But when you know that God called you, you say, well, just like Abraham, I'm going to go, not even knowing where I'm going, but I'm going to trust for the direction. But so few people have that take on things, that attitude, where they're just going to trust God, and they're missing so much by not trusting Him. It's a shame, really.
Yeah. I remember one young man that we interviewed looked like it was going to be just a wonderful opportunity for him, had skills that were marketable, that he could bring to the area, told us in the morning, I would like to be able to work with a small church because of the opportunity to serve God, the different things that they'd be able to get involved with. You can do sort of everything here, and that he knew and understood they weren't looking for money, but that they were just, wanted the opportunity to serve. And that was in the morning, and in the afternoon, we're not quite sure who he talked to or what, but it was like, well,
Why would I do that? It's too much money. It costs too much.
yeah, the cost is too great there. I have to think of my family, and like, well, yeah, we're thinking of your family too, and we're thinking of God. And yes, you could. Well, and my thing would be, well, then you do want to work with a big church, because you want a church that's going to be able to take care of your needs. That's what happens when you work with a smaller church, is that you try to work to get it to be big, okay? And one thing I've emphasized with so many is that as you grow, it's just like you're starting a new church somewhere. As it grows, you can get the support also. So whether it's church planning or working in a situation here, either way, you're still depending on God. So anyhow, let me see. When people amass wealth in order to prolong their physical existence or their ties to this world, they can miss taking care of the eternal. Some people put off serving God or even doing the things that are important in life until they are sufficiently prepared financially, rather than prepare and trust God as they go. And so they end up never being prepared, because you'll never be prepared enough. When you worry about acceptance because of how you appear rather than for what you are in your character, then that also is a form of trusting in riches. Okay, now depend on the Lord, depend on your Christian character. What you need to go through life is your Bible. That's it. Okay, any other thoughts before I go on with that? That's a very weighty section to have looked at. Okay, question 687. Why might the disciples think it is impossible for people to get saved then? And this is based on Mark 10, 24 to 26. The disciples were astonished at his words, but Jesus answereth again and saith unto them, Children, how hard is it for them that trust in riches to enter into the kingdom of God? It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And they were astonished out of measure, saying among themselves, Who then can be saved? So the answer we got is, okay, A, yes, A. Since all people have at least some money means they are trusting in money, then nobody could be saved. Well, let's look at B. If those who are blessed by God with riches couldn't be good enough to be saved, then how could anyone get saved? Well, there was no question about riches being good enough. People are saved by calling on the name of the Lord. Riches have nothing to do with it. For C, there are some things that are not possible for God to do. Well, no. The disciples didn't question the ability of God, just they questioned the ability of men. And so A, if having money is a sign of trusting money, then we all would indeed have a problem. Question 688, how did Jesus show that even those who have forsaken all are not immune to the possibility of covetousness? This is based on Matthew 19, 27 to 29. Then answered Peter and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? Now, Jesus answered, let me clue you in as we go to read this. He's like, it's almost as if he's saying, yeah, don't be so quick to think that you have totally forsaken all. You're going to be rewarded in the end, aren't you? So it's not like you're so humble and noble for all that you've given up. You haven't given up anything. You've taken on all of eternity with streets of gold. So he says, verse 28, Verily I say unto you that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive an hundredfold, and shall inherit everlasting life. So how did Jesus show that even those who have forsaken all are not immune to the possibility of covetousness? The answer we got is C. The disciples had great reward in the life to come. Okay, so Peter had tried to suggest that they were possibly immune to the problem of covetousness since they had left all. And Jesus pointed out that there will be rewards ahead of them. It's possible to turn our attention from earthly rewards and still be doing things because of chasing after rewards. We have to be careful to live primarily for the glory of God. Now, I say primarily. Sometimes people will say, well, you know, I'm doing things, but trying to work to get rewards in heaven, well, it sort of sounds crass, and it does sound a little bit crass. It does sound a little bit self-serving. And so people, I think, are genuinely concerned, well, I'm not so concerned about the rewards in heaven. Well, on the other hand, we sort of should be, because doesn't that sort of do despite to God? It's like, well, God wants to reward you, and you're telling him, no, I don't want what you have, right? And the God's saying, hey, look, I got this thing for you. It's my joy to give it to you. So people could be still looking for rewards, but you're primarily wanting to serve God. I don't know. What do you think about that, Alex? 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 Okay, so if you look at B, the disciples were bragging about how humble they were by how little they had. Well, Peter was not necessarily boasting about his humility, but being proud of poverty is also a form of covetousness, in that by boasting, they're making wealth a primary concern. Nancy, yes.
If that's the case, then couldn't B be one of the right answers? If that's a form of covetousness, wouldn't that show that they're not immune to that?
I'm going to take that as a possibility because it's a little bit difficult thing to do. I think the thing I was trying to key off of here was the idea of bragging about it, because they were bragging. If being braggadocious or boasting about it, that would make this a problem. They might say, well, I'm immune to covetousness because look how humble I am. I'm not susceptible to being covetous because I don't want anything. It's kind of a false humility. Okay, for A is a reference to how people can still be covetous while being religious, but just transferring it to their religious life. A says the disciples were getting rich off the sales of their books about how to get rich by speaking the promises of God. Okay, that's one of those things that's out there with the name it, claim it crowd. You can see this when preachers encourage people to seek wealth as evidence of God's approval, or going first class as a sign of God's approval. Like, I'm a child of the King, and you know, my father doesn't have any, has all the wealth. You know, I should live like I'm a child of the King and look like I've got a kingly fortune. That's a sign of saying, well, I must be living by faith because look how much riches I have. We should seek excellence, but not at the cost of true spirituality. Of course, you don't want to live so humbly that you live in a hovel either with dirt floors, because then you run the risk of looking genuinely foolish. Okay. 689, our last question here. How does somebody have true riches? Now, Alex, this is an important one. Okay, would you like to be rich someday? Okay, but what you really want to be able to have is true riches. Is having, and Alex, this is one for you, is having $1 million a sign of having riches? And the answer is no, it is not a sign. Okay? Having $1 million is not a sign of having riches. It shows that you have money, but riches being having wealth. If you had $1 million, which would you rather have? $1 million or your legs? Exactly. And the point is, and you'll get to this someday, you're going to get old enough, you'll have some kind of health crisis that's going to show up. When that happens and when you get through it, you're going to look back and say, really, when you have your health, you do have everything. I can walk in a park for free. I don't need $1 million to go walking in a park. I would much rather be walking in a park than have the $1 million. Having the $1 million, Alex, let me carry on this conversation with you for a moment. If you had $1 million, do you think that this would enable somebody to have a lot of friends? Remember, you're probably going to give the wrong answer. Give it a shot. I'm looking for a candid reaction. Okay, he says no. That's the correct answer, because sometimes you find when you have the $1 million, you have relatives that you never knew you had. Why, hey, Alex, I'm fifth cousin 59 times removed, and I'm your relative. Can you help me out with something? You just hit the lottery, and can you help me out? Or, yeah, and this is what happens with a lot of lottery winners. You have people calling upon them for assistance, almost as if you owe it to them because you didn't get it by hard work. Why should they have to work for it? They're just as much entitled to your luck as you are. And so you discover that you've got, that there's going to be a number of people that might be not true friends. Wealth is when you have true friends. One of the things that I think Nancy and I would agree on, especially as in years of ministry, is that you have some people that really last because they're really in it for the ministry and they're in it for the relationships. And it's not about, well, I'm not getting fed here anymore, or I'm having my nose out of joint over something, and they leave for what seem like good reasons, but they're really being covetous of how they feel, and they're covetous of comfort instead. And so you have true friendships. True wealth is your health, your friends, and it would be nice to be able to pay the rent also. Okay, so you do want God to bless, but true wealth consists far more than what you have. You might not ever go out to eat, but you also might miss the opportunities to have fellowship with somebody. Hospitality is something that we should not scrimp on. Living a simple life, as in C, makes it easier to have true riches, but people can be so dedicated in a simple life that they miss the true riches. And then A, which is the answer, the true way to the riches of a relationship is to focus on others. So Alex, seeing as I've got this conversation going on with you, if you want to have true friends, having true friends will happen as you, instead of getting people to admire you or to value you because you're so cool, okay? Just because you're so cool, number one, people are more concerned about their own selves, okay? But instead of trying to depend on how much you impress others, as you are a blessing to others, that's what will create that sense of relationship. So putting their interest last, putting your interest last, and putting others first is what's going to make the difference. Matthew 19:30 says, but many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. If you put yourself last, you'll end up being first. Okay? Let everybody else go through the door. Okay? Let everybody else go in line ahead of you at the buffet. Okay? And as you help somebody along and you're concerned about them, that's where your genuine love for people, and you have to do it genuinely, you can't fake it, okay? You can't do it as a way of manipulating people. You have to actually care, by the way, okay? But as you show that you care about others, then what will happen is you will develop those relationships. So you have to put yourself last. I put my concerns last. I'll give you a nice, for instance, did you enjoy that bonfire Friday night? I like that bonfire. I mean, I like bonfires anyhow. Okay, I like fire. If you were a boy, you like to go burn things when you were young. It's great fun, but I could say, well, it's only Alex and TJ that are going. But you know what? I enjoyed listening to Alex as he was ministering to TJ. Alex was talking to TJ about stuff on the way up there, and he was explaining things to him. And I thought, keep going, Alex, doing a good job. And then, I saw you fellowshipping with some of the people there. I thought, you see, this is good. Could I find something more fun to do? Actually, possibly not. Okay, but maybe I would have liked a trip to Disney World or something. Not really, but the reason I picked Disney World is because that would be something that would be catering to your fancies and whatever you like to have. No. The real value is putting self last and seeing the joy in others. I remember my mother growing up. Now, I think it's been a long time since I've ever mentioned this. People might not remember this at all, and Alex, I know you haven't heard this story ever because it's been a long time since I answered. But Alex, my mother's hands when she was born, they were like this. Okay, her hands, she had webbed hands, meaning that there was skin and muscle that was connecting the tissues in her fingers, so that she had to have them surgically when she was an infant cut apart to separate into 5 fingers. Okay, and one of the fingers was just absolutely useless. It was just sort of there. She became the fastest typist in her class, however, when it came time. But that wasn't the only thing about my mother. My mother had her legs, her feet were also, she was kind of, had issues. And so she really couldn't get out and do much. But she would press herself anyhow. She loved skating. But I remember we would go to the roller rink, and my mother, the money was not there necessarily or whatever else, but my mother would sit by the wayside and she would forego skating so that her kids could go instead. And when you look back on it, all that my mother would sacrifice in order that we might enjoy things, she got the joy out of watching us. As you see people growing in the Lord, there's far greater joy in that than getting stuff for self. I enjoy studying, but you know what I enjoy more is when I see other people figuring things out. And I'm glad I get to be a part of that. So putting yourself last, I had that as an example in both my mother and my father growing up. And that's where the true riches of relationship come from.